A very good evening and welcome to this edition of The Fourth Estate. Charles Mangushampagi. And this Sunday, we'll be taking a look at major events that dominated news headlines during the week. And among them, of course, is the continuing mystery around the murders of women in Entebbe and Nansana, both in Wakiso district, and the statements we've been receiving from government. They say about 44 suspects have been arrested. 22 of them have been presented before court. But is government giving the right answers to those murders? Do we actually know what's going on? Does someone know what is going on? Parliament was called out of recess for a special sitting during the week to discuss or to receive a statement from the Minister for Internal Affairs. We'll be analyzing that on the Fourth Estate tonight. We'll also be looking at the new controversy, the storm of prophets and the kissing of shoes. Interesting that a former journalist was actually doing the kissing of the shoes and was quoted in one of the tabloids saying, "I'd kiss Prophet Mbonye's shoes 1,000 times." And that's Kabalita. He was in the studio on Thursday with Patrick Kamara. We'll be taking our own look at what that means and where that is going. But we'll be beginning with a discussion on the continuing controversy around the land amendment in the Constitution, the Constitution amendment of the provisions relating to land. Initially, personally, I thought that President Museveni wasn't as invested into this as much as I've come to discover he is. He's been moving across Western Uganda. Why start in Western Uganda, in Kabale of all places, then move to Mbarara, then to Fort Portal? He was in Kibale yesterday and Movende, and now I think, as we speak now, he's appearing on Bukede, but the mobilization is happening in Masaka. Talking to people. Are the land issues in those areas the same? We'll be discussing that with a panel of journalists, and I don't know if he's a former politician or something, but I'll explain. He's a marketing person. Let me start with Ona Peter Ekomloit, Corporate and Legal Affairs Director, and Al Brewer is AB InBev. Ona, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Charles.
And my former MP.
Former MP, former...
Amuria County.
Amuria County,
it's
former...
in this country where being former is also
A title, yes.
No, you see, it's only you who doesn't fight to be called honorable. Those others want to continue being called honorable until... And even professors, even when they have stopped teaching. Angelo Izama, very nice to have you back.
Thank you, Charles.
Angelo Izama doesn't need a lot of introduction, so I'll not dwell on that. Fabrice Brad Rulinda contested in the primaries of the Entebbe municipality elections in the last election. You didn't go to the general election, did you? I mean, you didn't graduate to the...
Technically, I didn't run.
Technically, you didn't run, yes. You ran the NRM primaries.
I participated.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you develop marketing strategies.
Yes, I do. And communications.
And communications. Very nice to have you. And of course, my colleague, Ivan Okuda, who is still described as a law student until he graduates, and a journalist at the Daily Monitor.
Thank you, Charles. And very good evening to our viewers.
Yes, our viewers, some of our viewers will be saying they are starting to tweet already. That's we continue with our manos. So this is one of them. Let me start with you, Ona. You have said on this show and on another show we sit on together that President Museveni doesn't want to lose. And you believed that he wasn't going to let up on the Constitution Amendment in relation to Article 26, 2 of the Constitution. Now, Halima Abdallah writes for the East African, is reporting in the paper that's coming out this week. I don't think anybody has reported this yet, that government has moved to save the bill that was tabled, the Constitution Amendment bill that was tabled before Parliament, to ask for more time. After the caucus sat, appointed the Vice President, Kiwanuka Sekandi, as to lead a special committee, and the President has been doing his mobilization. They went quietly and asked for more time in Parliament to make sure that the bill is given more time and to keep it alive. Normally, after 45 days, if government hasn't followed up, then it would have collapsed automatically. But they're trying to save it.
Yes, Charles, I said it, and I think President Museveni's strength is precisely that he has been consistent. It's actually his critics who sometimes decide that he's not consistent. because they support him on one thing, and when they disagree on the other, they say it's inconsistent. On this issue of land, I think the biggest mistake the MPs are making, which many people have made, is to think that you can take Yoweri Museveni on in public and sort of come out just something that you have defeated him. He knows that the Ugandan mindset is about a strong leader, and that's why he has held this country this long. He knows that people want to see you as a strong leader. And to go to the caucus in Entebbe and then be seen as to have been defeated, the kind of coverage, how the MPs have been repeating that because the people don't want this, so we are not supporting the president for once. I think if they wanted maybe to make him change his mind, that was the wrong approach. So now he's come out fighting, and I think he may not push the original version, but at least at the end of the day, he will have to make sure that something is passed and he's seen to be leading. Because there was this linkage that this was part of trying to test the waters for age limit. And if indeed it is, how could he afford to lose on this one and expect to win on age limit? Because he will have blinked fast, and he has rarely blinked fast on in many political contests. So he wouldn't let it go like that. So if he's gone out fighting on radio, I think the MPs will have to climb down, they'll have to strike a compromise.
Angela, I've been following the president. I was actually in Fort Portal on Wednesday when he was there. He appeared on Voice of Toro. And he's not answering the questions. He's selling his position. He's not allowing the moderators on those stations to ask him questions. So he's not answering the public's questions. He's selling his version of what he wants.
Indoctrinating.
Some kind of indoctrination.
Well, I mean,
does it work?
We shall see at the end of this process if it does. Of course, I don't support this aggression on land, the way the government has gone after landed assets. Look, I think that you can scatter around many things on the question of land ownership and land use. And the argument I have seen him make is, look, we shall deal with thieves, we shall restore proper title to those who are entitled. In other words, we shall administer land better, and if you can trust us to do that for you with these very many agencies and resources in place, then you can also trust us with the current version is that to acquire your land for the greater public good. The problem, I think, is that he's conflating many things. Look, he can be an activist against land grabbers, many of whom are his colleagues, people he supervises. That's fine. The fundamental question, I think, with regard to land is that land is just not an economic resource alone. And to sell economic development as in exchange for the public trust over this land, I think it won't work for most people.
Why do you think it won't work?
Quite simply because I think that it's at the very end, it's the last resort that most people have. Their land is their true identity. And they don't look at land simply in economic terms. And I think that's the mistake that he is making. Everywhere he has gone, he has talked about land administration. And he hasn't been accountable. He hasn't held himself accountable for the problems that people are facing with regard to this land administration. I'm still waiting for him to deal with the emotional aspects of this issue, which is why I think MPs are scared correctly about confronting people, because people are very emotional over land.
Fabrice, the kind of the choice of where the president began, you advise people on marketing strategy and public relations. The choice of Western Uganda, the kinds of land conflicts in the Chigezi sub-region, in the Ankole sub-region, in the Toro sub-region, in the Bunyoro sub-region, are completely far removed from what the president is trying to sell. Actually, you find more people there complaining that government has grabbed their land than cases of where
Government projects have stalled.
Government projects have stalled. There's a particular case. There's a man, he's a former prime minister in Toro Kingdom called Stephen Irumba. He runs a 500-acre farm, cattle farm and goat farm. He's a breeder. When Ugandans who had been living in Tanzania were chased back, government decided to resettle them. They resettled them in Kyaka refugee settlement, which he neighbors, and they entered 200 acres of his land. And that was one of the issues the president was presented with, and he said he would investigate when he was in Fort Porto the other day. And he's asking, encouraging local investors and stuff like that. Why would he choose to start that kind of campaign in an area whose problem with land is completely different from what this law is supposed to heal?
Charles, I think we are looking at this one way. We're not looking at it holistically. I like the way Ona put it in the beginning. He said, President Museveni is consistent. He's a consistent person. What he's selling, like you have said, he is selling his position. He is selling what he believes should be looked into. You've asked why that region. I don't think if you look at the Bunyoro and all that, when we talk about investments and factories and all that, these are places where people have huge chunks of land. Individuals are sitting on huge chunks of land. You're looking at things like the refinery that has to be set up. You're looking at the pipeline and all that. All that is not far off from what you're talking about in terms of the development. Imagine if person X says you cannot pass through my farm with your pipeline. What that does is it takes away the ability to put that pipeline there. I want to disagree a little bit with Angelo when he says he's not giving answers or he's not looking.
I'm not saying he's not being accountable.
He's not being accountable. I think the issue we've had, you look at the expressway. It stalled because one person owned the rock and decided, I want a certain amount of money, which meant that the whole project had to wait. I agree. There should be ways to protect the people. There should be ways to protect land, because that's, at the end of the day, that's all we have. But at what expense? We are always applauding Rwanda. We are always saying how great and all that and how they're growing and everything. In Rwanda, you cannot stall development because you own a piece of land.
But isn't that exactly the problem, Fabrice? Because what the headwinds that this proposed amendment has met is exactly that government seems to be trying to package what should be a good idea, but the premise on which it's being sold is completely different.
Yeah, but
where a project has been stalled, it's because either the person who is stalling the project had prior information, acquired land knowing that the government project is going to run through here, or has sufficient connections to be able to stall a government process.
Yes, but you see, that's the thing. Legally, they cannot take away his land. Legally, they cannot force him. But government is not saying, we will come and take your land away for free. No. What they're saying is, instead of you refusing, there's a valuation, there is a price. What government does is, you move off the land, as in compulsory that you will have to move off. What government does is they compensate you, and they utilize your land for the project. I've seen people running with the idea of briefcase companies and all that, but there is compensation. So what should we be pushing for as Ugandans? We should be pushing to see that the policy that is put in place actually protects people from grabbing, actually protects people from being given settlements that are not of the current value. And how are people being compensated? Have we evaluated their things? Have we evaluated the business? Because you find somebody who is actually in a swamp claiming he wants billions of shillings, okay, for a project instead of, say, us having a road. Are we looking at the general good, or are we looking at individuals?
Ivan,
Yes.
Where do you find the nexus between what the current challenges are with the land? Because people have referred to a lot of provisions, which the president doesn't talk about. He doesn't talk about the 1964 Compulsory Land Acquisition Act, He doesn't talk about the Amini Decree on land, 1972. He talks about the land policy a bit. He talks about the 1998 Land Act, which has been amended, and he talks about the constitutional provision. I don't know. One, I found that his choice of where to start the campaign from, curious. That's number one. How he's selling his message is also equally interesting for me, and I do not know how far that can take him. But of course, what Mbonye talked about, he's waging a war. Many people believe he wanted to play the land amendment, knowing how emotive it is, alongside 102
Of the
B
Constitution.
of the Constitution, which is on age limit.
That's yes.
Yes.
As a matter of preamble, I think I'm impressed that Uganda is at a stage of the nourishment of our democracy, where if you have a proposed amendment to the Constitution touching a matter sensitive as land, you have substantial debate from different quarters, and hope that by the time any legal reform is arrived at, it's a process that accrues from interaction with the people and gathering the views of the people. And I saw that with the Public Order Management Bill. The first form as proposed by government was really draconian until the Abdu Katun tools and Medat Segonas pushed through some amendments to the bill. So I think it's good for us as a country that we have these debates before.
But it hasn't mattered really how the Public Order Management Bill has been enforced.
Oh, maybe.
The intention, the script of the wording of the law,
yes,
hasn't deterred police to act the way it intended to act.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
My point though is, I mean, it's good that we have these healthy debates in this country. It could have been worse. Somebody could have possibly just pushed through these amendments without this kind of extensive debate. So that's commendable. But of course, I find the president's campaign quite intriguing, but also at a personal level, I hope he fails. One, you have, out of the acrimony that was present at the NRM caucus meeting, an agreement that let a committee led by the vice president sit and try to find a middle ground. That committee has not yet delivered on the terms of reference assigned to it. Number two, this country is paying billions of money to a commission of inquiry led by Justice of the Court of Appeal, Catherine Mbonye, and a team of other eminent citizens of this country, to, among other terms of reference, look into the land question, look into the law, look into the land policy, and look into areas that need adjustments and reform. That commission of inquiry has not yet delivered on the terms of reference. So it's quite intriguing that the president and sections of parliament and sections of the executive and by extension his supporters are pushing for amendments that are essentially, for all intents and purposes, part of the substance of the work of the second committee, but also, more importantly, the work of the Justice Catherine Mbonye committee. So I think we need to ask the question, why the hurry? Why not wait for the commission of inquiry, which the president himself saw in, to particularly, among other things, answer the question of what legal reforms with specific reference to land this country needs to achieve.
You are the journalist, so help us.
So
you are the journalist in the field.
Yeah,
so
Ivan,
that's one.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
What is the politics of this effort? I mean, Onapito started us off by saying the president doesn't want to lose. It's understandable. But what is the politics of this? Because sitting from where we sit, it does look like he's on a countrywide campaign. That campaign may be about land, but the campaign could be about other things.
Maybe let me just but is that new though with President Museveni? Is that really new? Maybe as a person from the beginning, from the time NRM took over, President Museveni has always been a person who goes countrywide. He is teaching whatever operation he gets into. That is his mode of operation. That is how he operates.
It's always agenda driven.
That's it. I think Charles,
the agenda is to say, we want development. We want to grow. We want to get there, but we have to be able to compromise. We have to be able to allow that development. We have to be accepting that for us to grow, for us to develop, we are going to have to accept that. I mean, we cannot put skyscrapers, we cannot put roads, we cannot put railway in the sky. We need land.
Development happens in a context. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And that which you call development actually is about human beings. In 1995, fine gentlemen and ladies congregating themselves under the Constituent Assembly came up with a fairly progressive constitution with all the loopholes people might want to point out. Among other things governing the administration of land. And we said land shall belong to the people of Uganda. And we realized that there might come instances when government needs to actually acquire land. And then we made provisions for that in the 1995 constitution. But more importantly, we established in that constitution a golden standard, internationally recognized and respected, that by the time government acquires your piece of property, that must be preceded by fair, prompt, and adequate compensation. And that also is the spirit of the law that we're quoting on compulsory acquisition of land by government. And that's a golden standard. If you read the Constitution of Kenya, it provides for exactly the same. I do not want us to copy from countries like Rwanda or Tanzania or other less progressive societies.
So they are less progressive because they're different.
In a society where we aspire to be better.
Could you quickly respond to Angelo's question? What's the politics? Because I think that's where the crux of the matter is. So the niceties, the colorful language that Fabrice is talking about, of we want to do development without impediment, without delay, that story Ugandans have had for many years. And they're saying acquisition of land to do those developments is the least of the concerns. The corruption at evaluation, the corruption at payment,
at even the
corruption, yes, at hoarding
and acquisition of land, right?
And acquisition of land.
Yeah, but who is hoarding again when we come back? It's not government. What is happening is individuals see a project coming. What they do is they hoard the land. Hope that
I think yes, the politics is simple. This is about President Museveni is famous for his what is Africa's problem, what is Uganda's problem. At every juncture, he wants to define it. He's the one to define. He comes with different interpretations, and this now is pushing that for infrastructure to happen, government must have the power to use land the way it wishes, and it must be about. Forget it's not even about
saying
you made your point. I want to make my point. It's not even about, then in government, who must decide? President Museveni is unashamedly always saying he has a vision and he wants to decide. So in this case, he has decided that if this is how land should be acquired, you can have all the other interpretations, but I'm the leader and I want this to be the version.
Thank you. We need, gentlemen, to take a quick commercial break. And as we take the break, Joseph Nwabina is watching us and says, to me, everything starts and stops with government. The citizens always hear how much of their money is stolen in corruption. So when they get a chance to interface with the government, like in the case of land takeover and compensation, they also want to squeeze government. Every move by government is treated with a pinch of salt. We'll pick this up after a short commercial break.
Sorry for...
Welcome back to this edition of the Fourth Estate. We started with a discussion on the president's tours in the countryside, starting with Western Uganda, to promote his ideas on the proposed constitutional amendment bill affecting Article 26 of the Constitution on compulsory acquisition of land. Amanzuru Leslie William from Ajumani is watching us and says, Dear Charles, the president is his own devil's disciple on the current drive to the constitutional amendment on land. Do you make out what Amanzuru is trying to tell us?
Well, because you see, if you're a preacher, you must be accountable. You know, they say that to teach, one must first teach themselves. This president, first of all, he runs an administration that can't be trusted with a corner store. You know, by his own admission, you know, his house is full of thieves. But there's a system that the thieves define that system. Professor wrote a long time ago that the reports of the Auditor General in Uganda read like a version of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. But I think it's true that in our
Alibaba was nicer because he shared the money.
But I'll tell you. Let me link this to Prophet Mbonye, because I have developed a running analysis of why these things are, because in the argument about economic development is no different from the wealth gospel that pastors and others are preaching, but it also it's based upon the principle of the gamble. That today Fabrice is here with us, tomorrow we see him driving a Hummer, he has built houses, and everyone doesn't want to ask how he got that money, but they believe that they too can be gifted. And that's the system that the country is running.
So Mbonye starts with a small fellowship at...
It doesn't matter. And on the issue of people were criticizing his reference to it, the Honorable Minister for Security, that when it came to crime, some of the murders that were happening in Entebbe were ritualistic murders linked to this idea of the Illuminati. And I said it here on your show, that Ugandans actually believe the Illuminati are real because they think, and we go back to the time that Chameleon allegedly went underwater, they think that riches are things that you just happen on. This is the system that the country runs. I criticize it because the president himself, he likes to market this idea that our society is some kind of market. It is impersonal, that he can take Uganda into middle income. What is middle income? What does that mean, really? That you put a market figure on the lives and property of people? So people are organized in different ways, but the philosophy that runs our country is this Mfunaism business, like where do I eat today? Yeah. And he thinks that he can bifurcate, chop the country into pieces, and by doing that, deliver on some kind of grand idea of where Uganda would go. What Leslie is saying, that he's his own devil's disciple, is true. The president that we have supported all these years has had two pillars that have made him what he is for 31 years. That is, that he is someone who has held the country on a stable path at State House, but most importantly provided security, which is safety of persons and property. This current version of Museveni 2.1 that sees himself as delivering an economic miracle and wants to redefine himself is a president who for all intents and purposes, is going against his own record. He's destroying his own track record on security, which is well established.
We'll come to the security in a moment. Let me read a message from Edmond in Tinder. This is fairly personal. He says, the gentleman in the middle, there are two gentlemen in the middle, so I don't know, three actually in the middle, so I don't know who. He says, in the middle is in a wrong forum. He is misplaced. He is politicking. We don't want this country to sink with his likes. Who will support President Museveni even with the most unpopular campaign? So among you gentlemen in the middle, who is the gentleman in the middle?
I take the gentleman in the middle to be me.
Fabrice occasionally advises the president, which is true.
But
no one should be ashamed of supporting. Look, the leader that we know, okay?
Yes.
This president, I think, remains a popular character. Not only that, his legacy, I think, is already written. To rewrite it, Charles, and I beg counsel for your time. You see, the dynamic of Yoweri Museveni is working against itself. The security guy that wants to reinvent himself as an economic miracle worker, however, has achieved power at the expense of institutions. Now, after you've gone ahead and hollowed out all institutions, centralized power, personalized it, okay? These are the instruments that you need to deliver on that economic miracle. You can't do it now. And that's why I think that this land thing should fail and be taken over by someone else who comes after him, precisely because these instruments are not there. The path that he took is also the path that destroyed public trust in government institutions today.
Let me take a message from Margaret Muhanga. Honorable Margaret Muhanga is Member of Parliament for Burashia County in Kabarole District.
Is that the same Muhanga who was involved in a land scandal that happened to be about UBC land?
Let me first read the message. She says, I was with His Excellency the President on radio.
No, but you should clarify for your viewers, because people develop temporary amnesia.
First listen to the message.
She might have become born again.
First listen to the message.
I like your reference,
says,
though.
I was with His Excellency the President on radio. He actually quoted a man on Kamwenge Road. The President launched this road on Thursday, who demanded 1 billion shillings for half an acre of land, and the road was diverted, hence making it longer and complicated to execute. He talked of so many other examples of stalled projects, including one in Intungamo, etc. Yes, you want to respond?
But that's the same
when the Minister of Lands was
individual, right, who
yes
allegedly flipped government property.
was starting this campaign. One of the things that appeared in the New Vision and the Monitor and other media houses was a breakdown of how much government has lost because of delays and what government considers unfair demands or claims by landowners who, in essence, are obstructing the progress of infrastructure projects. The sum total of the monies involved are not even 500 billion shillings. It's possibly 350 billion shillings. You find in one case someone claimed 300 million shillings, whereas the government value found their land worth possibly 80 million shillings. Now, I'm not convinced that is enough. The few examples that the propaganda machinery is churning out of, one man on Entebbe Road who was delaying the progress of the express highway, one man in Kamwenge, one man in District X, essentially so
But
few.
what is
so
the
few.
legal basis here, council?
I'm coming to that.
Because
I'm coming to that.
MPs who are supposed to decide this
Yes.
thing can determine their own salaries,
Yes,
right?
let me come to that. Let me come to
But
that.
you want a government valuer to
Yes.
come and determine
Let
the
me-
value of my
let me come
land?
to that, Angelo. Those examples are so few to warrant an amendment of the Constitution that has monumental impact on not just citizen-government relations, but on, like Angela has rightfully explained, on the basic ingredient of human existence as land. But two, by the
But
time...
I
by the
disagree
time-
with your
but-
interpretation
but-
of the Constitution when it was made in 1996,
Let
because
me-
even then,
Yes.
I don't think that MPs who say that all land belongs to the people were saying anything new, because that right is not theirs to give.
No, no,
You
it's
see?
okay, it's okay. Let me...
Yeah, because that's not
also,
a right.
But
that-
also, what I'm very suspicious why government is reluctant to enter into a contractual obligation with the landowner, because
Are they,
listen,
are they
listen,
actually saying,
listen,
are
listen.
they saying that they
let
should
me-
not
let me-
enter
let me-
into
let me make
contractual
my point.
obligation?
Let me make my point, because a contract is defined by law. It's a legal word. A contract, in the simplest form, if one is to reduce it, is essentially an agreement between one or two parties. By the time, and this is why the spirit of this law is bad, by the time government actually proceeds to make any development on your land, that essentially means no contract has happened. That essentially means there was no agreement in the first place, and therefore that explains why government is saying we should deposit money in court, and then if you have a complaint, and if you're not satisfied, then go to court, where we know courts will take 10 years to hear a case. Sometimes cases last in the court system longer than that. That essentially means there is no agreement. That means there is no contract. So you are defiling the most basic tenets of even contracts.
Okay. Hold it,
It's
Fabrice.
incomprehensible.
I
It
want
should
to
be
draw
defeated.
Honor into this. Honor, the definition of the problem, because many people don't believe that government acquisition of land for government projects is actually the problem. The problem is how that process is arrived at, and whether this amendment can heal that or not. Unless if you deal with the general corruption in government, then you can deal with it. Without dealing with that,
I don't think the amendment will solve the problem, because much of the problem is being engineered by players within the government who have power to decide. There have been enough cases that have been proved or that have been cited that there is collusion between people even within the government value itself, within Ministry of Justice, all these agencies that are looking for the land. They go and talk to friends, and they go and stage ownerships, they stage claims. So this cannot be cured by the law. This is really an endemic problem. And also the other problem is the frustration of some citizens with the service delivered, which I'm sure the president agrees. So people are sort of not feeling the same passion for an infrastructural development that the president and the government, as we know, it feels.
or wants to make us believe.
Okay, for example, a power line, people see power lines running over their heads, but they have no capacity to connect power. So sometimes you can't convince them that government putting a power line is good for them.
Okay. Musa Lado is watching us and says, if government wants to build a skyscraper on my piece of land, the deal is simple. Pay me the market value and I move on.
And that is fair, actually, Charles. This is a fair thing. And I think that I have seen the tone of the campaign is to say that somehow, if you don't agree with the way the value of the way the government has valued your land, then somehow you're unpatriotic.
No, but I don't think so.
People in this country support the government efforts at every level, whether it is health, whether it's employment, security, or infrastructure, or security. You know, because the government is all of us. What I think is being a line that the government is crossing here is to say that because its activities tend to represent our common interest, it can go a step further and rob you of your land. Now, several years ago, Charles, you remember, when they had just appointed a judge as the head of the Inspectorate of Government, Justice Faith Mwanda. I remember having a conversation with that judge, and I said, no, look, the one thing you can do in your tenure, which would make sense to all of us, would be to recall all land titles and reissue them. Recall all titles and reissue them. That way, you sanitize the environment, it is clear who owns what, and then you reduce this, because in Kampala here, for example, we had a very artificial real estate market, which has taken the economic crisis to collapse now. If the government had gone that path and restored faith in its own documents, legal documents, land titles and certificates and so forth, people would be reassured, by the way, that its activities can be trusted. But you have a situation here where the monkey is being called to judge the matters of the forest.
And that, Mr. Charles, is a problem.
That's the problem.
The government has to deal with, especially the president, who, sadly has to be the one to spare time out of a very busy schedule, running defense, international affairs, and finance, and all these things. And he has a functional secretariat, he has an entire NRM caucus, he has all this state machinery, and he has to be the one to go and plead with we ordinary mortals to understand where he's coming from. But of course, the challenge is mutual suspicion and mistrust. We come from a history, specifically with reference to this regime, of colossal corruption, almost official. We come from a history of people that have lost land in the most gruesome and painful ways, and partly a function of people abusing state power and state institutions to do that. So to convince a population such as that you can come up with a law or an amendment to the constitution that essentially gives government the right to officially grab your land, I think it's going to be very difficult.
But I think it's also fair to the president to acknowledge that indeed the land issue has been totally distorted, also to the extent that communities now may not even act always necessarily in their own interest over the issue of land. There is so much, I'm sorry to say, emotional attachment to land for its own sake.
Which is good. The emotional attachment is actually good and healthy.
It's not.
It's good.
I always tell for that.
There's nothing wrong with emotional attachment on the question of land. It's a life and death matter.
My point.
Yes.
Why are Africans dying in the seas to go to countries where they don't own an inch of land? So Africa is not going to devolve entirely on everyone owning land, because there's evidence.
How many people live there?
Some of the most developed societies where people are living very high standards of living, not everyone owns land. Of course, we are far from that, but that will be the ultimate objective, that those who can utilize land for the welfare of the majority will have to own land.
Yes, how does this government's argument tie? Because I hear you.
The connection, yes.
Where's the connection between the proposed amendment and what you're saying?
No, of course, theoretically, the argument is that government should be able to take land to reorganize wealth for the good of the common majority.
Yes, but
that is
how many
ideal
places?
situation.
How many places?
Fabrice, is this the kind of government, can President Museveni convince Ugandans that he can do exactly what Ona is talking about? Because people will look back and say, look, you came here with privatization, for example. Said you guys were mismanaging these government parastatals, sell them, and after selling them, they'll become more efficient, you reduce corruption in government. It hasn't reduced.
The people who supervised the privatization were the ones who became wealthy.
Who became wealthy. You created those individuals. And then the other question is, you're going to use an example like, for example, Shimoni.
So you need to amend the law.
Yes. What is the
remove
chances?
the individuals. Just amend the law and remove the individuals.
Just a moment.
Just a moment.
One of the other concerns that people raise, because when the president was in Fort Portal, I was following discussions on other forums, and actually people were listening to him. They were having a completely different discussion on the land question from what he was trying to sell on the radio. Some people will be asking, what are the chances that you come, I on a people's land, and say, we want a government project here, 2-3 years down the road, there is no government project there, and it ends up in the private hands of Fabrice. Like has happened with, no, even before you go to Nakawa, look at Shimoni. How did it end up there?
What about the free trade zone by the lake here?
Yes,
remember
the free trade zone.
That free
and
trade
some
zone.
people are also going to ask and say, where government land has not been in dispute, its acquisition has not been in dispute, they sent people out of Nakawa and Naguru estates, kicking and screaming, and promised them, within 2 years, you'll have apartments in which you can live, and you'll have first priority.
First priority.
10 years down the road, there is no satellite city in
it's
Nakawa
not
and
been 10
Naguru.
years.
Actually, I had a pile of letters written by the president, parceling out Nakawa and Naguru to different holders. And
the investors have pulled out now.
Yes, and at some stage, the president had run into some bit of trouble because he would allocate a piece of land and then he's told, no, actually the land is finished, so you can't allocate in that same area. So he withdraws and then writes another letter allocating someone else. And such an interesting thing. And people are going to say, I mean the questions out there are, yes, you're going on a drive to sell this idea. Is that actually where the problem is?
Absolutely.
And how much are you doing to address that particular problem? We don't need to dwell on this a lot more. We need to transition and talk about what Angela had introduced, the question of security and the murder of young women. Government gave a statement, the Minister of Internal Affairs gave a statement and said some of the killings are ritualistic in nature, for sacrifice, people are trying to draw blood out of the victims, and some are trying to join Illuminati.
They think Illuminati are real.
Yes, they think Illuminati is behind this. Ona, you're laughing. Let me start with
I'm laughing because, look, I think this is quite a major crisis for our society because in this modern, you can put that in quotes, era, even government can still advance that kind of theory for crime. I mean, I don't know the exact cause of the murders, but one would tend to assume that if it is the same killer, then it's most likely one person or not. But now they are arresting dozens of people, and that seems to be inconsistent with the serial killers, you know?
Yeah.
And they tend to be quite very sophisticated people who often are not motivated by things like blood and what. They are sometimes they are a bit of workers. They are a bit mentally, and in many countries where this has happened, they can be very decent people during daytime, appear normal, but something just goes off them, and they are smart. So I don't know, but I don't think government should be advancing this populist notion of ritual killing.
When the Minister of Internal Affairs spoke, I remembered covering a press conference many years ago at when the former site of UBC, we were talking about land, which now is occupied by the Pearl of Africa Hotel. And the Minister of State for Defense at the time, Ruth Nankabirwa, told us that government had been convinced that Joseph Kony was using witchcraft to evade capture in northern Uganda. I remember writing a story to that effect. So when the minister spoke and said, presented before Parliament, Illuminati and ritualistic killing, I was internally collapsing.
But anyway, I want to defend him.
Let me put a question, Angelo. Gaki, I'm using the East African newspaper for reference. Gaki is writing a story and saying there have been cycles of murders that have gone unexplained from as way back as about 2011. You had people being hit with iron bars, the Katayimbwa. That phase ended without any meaningful prosecution of whether it was a serial killer or a group of organized killers that were behind that. you had killings of people who were burrowing through homes, especially in Luengo and Rakai areas, and killing entire families. That never got concluded reasonably. You had people being killed, mobile money vendors, kiosks, operators were being murdered, and that wasn't. Then you tie in.
Then there's a spate where they were killing engineers and professionals.
Yes.
At some
Then
point.
you had a spate when they started killing Muslim clerics. The other day court acquitted those that had been tried. And someone is asking, if you pick up 44 people, dozens of people, prosecute them, arrest them and then prosecute them, do you solve the problem? The mayor of Kamwenga has just been released because he was arrested in relation to the murder,
Of course.
linked to the murder of former AIGP Kawesi. The killers of Joan Kageze haven't been prosecuted. And someone is asking, are you running away with quick statements that dismiss and then you leave a killer on the loose?
I don't know whether the minister has the resources to, deploy to deal with this problem professionally as he would have liked.
They deployed a chopper in Entebbe.
I'm talking about
the IGP camped in Entebbe. the Minister for Security camped in Entebbe.
Look,
But a chopper, what is the chopper
investigations,
thing?
Charles,
I have no idea.
are scientific. And I accept his explanation partly because I think that this idea of ritual murder is linked to the search for wealth. And this belief on Illuminati, which had actually been a buzz around social media linked to the rich gang crew, and this randomness of people getting money overnight is real. That there are certain people who might take this a step further and do killings in the false belief that it would make them rich is a credible reason. So don't dismiss J.J. Odong simply because he asserted what really probably came to him through his investigators. What I think is right is that if you look at the entire capacity of law enforcement to conclude investigations and to even to dismember criminal organizations, that capacity has reduced over time. Even if actually the police and there's actually large police conferences going on in Kampala today, even if the capacity of the police has increased. And the reasoning I offered you, Charles, years ago was that, look, because politics has hollowed out public institutions, including, by the way, the politicization of the security organs, and the police has been the most epic example of that. It drives ordinary crime into a black market. So people are really, the black market for justice operates, it may actually appropriate resources that are formal resources, but people are resorting to dealing with their own issues outside of the formal systems.
Okay.
Even if they're using, even if they're acting within those formal systems. And I think that my prediction at the time in 2004 was that this kind of violence would increase with time, as we are saying, and I don't think it's going to end with the sentiment.
Fabrice and Ivan, hold your thoughts for a moment. We'll need to take a break, but let me take a message from two messages. One from Moses Opito. He's a lawyer and a land valuer. He says, he's a valuer rather. Just create an alternative dispute resolution mechanism to expeditiously hear and dispose of the matter. Compensation, quantum dispute, and there will be no delays. And Anthony is watching us. He's somewhere in the United States, and he says, Anthony says, great show as always. Thank you, Anthony. How will the constitutional amendment solve, number one, an untimely and fraudulent compensation processes? Two, acquisition fraud by insiders, usually civil servants, prior to government projects. Three, court delays in disposing of land-related cases. Four, an irregular and opaque land valuation process. This is why people aren't convinced. That's Anthony. And Anthony adds, on the killings, he says, on the killings, to be fair to the minister, he said that suspects believed that they were being initiated into the Illuminati community. Perhaps he should have made it clear that Illuminati. However, his statement is true. People can kill for this kind of thing in Uganda. he should have made it clear that Illuminati is a bogus idea. Yeah, he's corrected the message. That it's a bogus idea. But when a minister declares, concludes the case on the floor of Parliament so quickly.
And the Prime Minister confirmed, said it's true, our society still has...
yes, the Prime Minister
it's
confirmed.
not a lie.
I have lots of reason to worry. Gentlemen, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll conclude this discussion with discussing Prophet Mbonye and a few other things. We'll be right back. Welcome back this last segment of the Fourth Estate, and we've been discussing various issues that dominated news headlines during the week. And one of the most debated development during the week was pictures of people, men and women, kissing the feet of a prophet, sitting on a regal chair, white with golden embroidery.
Chinese.
Chinese.
Leather.
Eh?
Pleather.
Eh?
Plastic leather.
Plastic leather. It's called pleather. Okay, let's start from there. Fabrice.
Now, I think for me, if there is real Illuminati, this is live on TV. This, I don't know whatever people call Illuminati, but this looks to be it. Something which makes supposedly highly educated people to kiss shoes and all that. You couldn't get better than that in Illuminati.
No, I think you're referring to illuminate.
I don't know. Because I think the difference is the same because Illuminati itself has not been defined.
Illuminati has very bad
apparently.
connotations. Illuminati has very terrible connotation when using the same sentence with the pastor.
Do you think this thing has generated a lot of debate? Is that debate worth it, or are we just being idle?
But Charles, personally, I think we are being idle if we're going to continue having this discussion. Faith is one of those things that we cannot, or you cannot convince somebody to act in a different way. People have their beliefs.
Yeah, that's true.
You will find that's why we have extremists that blow themselves up, all in the name of God. That's why we had, if you even go back in history, you look at the Crusaders, they believed they were on a holy mission, that you can kill somebody all in the name of faith. I think our people are at that place where, I mean, faith, just like politics, it is, they play with that thing that you're seeking for. They sell you something, hope. They sell you a better thing. That's why you see a person who doesn't have money to feed people at home can take that very money, go and give it to a pastor, all in hope of getting more. That's why you see that somebody can get his money, hard-earned money. You don't have a car, but you go and buy your pastor a new car. You go, I mean, there are places like Nigeria where pastors have private jets. And the people giving them this almost have nothing.
I've seen a joke.
So
one of the comments
how
on
can you then say that we are being redundant to debate
No, I'm
that
not
kind of serious situation where people who have nothing and you are talking about crime, you are talking about murder.
But you see, Honor,
but
here's the
we're
situation.
talking about desperation.
No, believe me, I do not agree that a grown man should go and kiss a man's shoe, or there are very many, or they tell people don't go to hospitals, you've already been healed, yet you find some of these pastors have bodyguards. They are quick to run to hospital when they're not feeling fine, but they tell their flock, I have prayed for you, so you're healed. I don't agree with it, but here's the situation. Us sitting and discussing it, us debating it, is not going to change the situation when it comes to these people's faith. If you talk to the people who, the followers of Pastor Kakande, who buy that rice at 50,000 shillings a kilo, if you talk to them, they will tell you, we are not complaining. What is your problem with it? If you talk to these people who buy their pastors' cars, I mean, the other day there was, what's his name? What's his name? The pastor from Rubaga.
The 77
Yes,
days of Odog.
which has been going on for a whole year. They keep having 77 and 77. If you do take time to just watch, somebody comes and says, I have put a seed of 15 million. I have put a seed of 40 million. If you talk to that person, in his honest belief, he could be educated, he could be smart, you are not going to dissuade him from giving this money or from doing the things that you're doing. You yourself told me, Kabuleta said, he will kiss these shoes over and over and over again. Because guess what? In his deep conviction, he believes that this here is his path to salvation. This is his path to heaven.
Let me ask a question. That's been coming up. Number one is, what is the responsibility of government? We had the Minister for Ethics and Integrity for a segment last Sunday, and he's been running around inaugurating a pornography committee, spending 2 billion shillings, and people have been asking, wouldn't you be spending your time better looking into these churches? And by the time a church in the center of the capital,
It's not
in
a
the center
church.
of the country,
Mbonye's is a fellowship.
well, a fellowship, gets educated people, one putting in their little hard-earned money or their stolen money, because not all of them are actually able to earn this money and hand it over to the church, but kissing their shoes. Angelo, where you have had a history where 1,000 people have gathered in what they thought was a church, they were barricaded inside there and
Burnt
set
to
on
death.
fire and burnt to death. And the report of that investigation has never been concluded. A committee was put in place. It never sat for a single day. I spoke to all the members of that committee before. None of them, they did not have a single meeting to investigate the killings by Chibwetere in Kanungu. And you have...
We don't even know what Chibutere is.
Yes, nobody knows what exactly happened because there was no report.
If he's alive
And
or
now
dead.
you have this mushrooming of faith institutions, and you're talking about faith and nobody being able to intervene, and what they are going through, what extent these so-called pastors and prophets and evangelists and other people are taking people through. And don't you need at some point to pause as a society, Angelo, and ask, there's something going on here that needs to be addressed?
I think individuals really should have that conversation with themselves, seriously, and families too. You know, in Mexico, this is in the worst ungoverned spaces where drug lords and drug gangs kill each other. There are even saints for assassins. They go and pray to their gods. Fabrice is right. That religion, to put it in Marx's words, attributed to him, is the opium of the masses. I think the role of the government, of course, I believe in real separation of church and state.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I also recognize that at some point where you've got weak state institutions, they breed this environment where secret societies and others become the real alternative. I ask myself that question every day. It's like, okay, why is there proliferation of these sorts of organizations? They have one. They have one thing in common. They're all about a gamble, because I think in Uganda we don't have, and the state has not anchored a proper public system that provides us with predictability. You're a Ugandan, you go to school, you know, there's a fair chance that even if the economy is bad, that the decision makers are making the right decisions. You can build a career, you can build a family, you can retire. All of these things are now in the wind. And in that environment, of course, that void will be filled up by all kinds of people, whether they have got good or bad intentions, who now provide this kind of safety net. And by the way, don't talk about only the religious people. Gambling is laying to waste a lot of our communities in villages right now. You can go to the lowest village, you find a betting shop.
It's not being regulated. We now have the lotteries board.
Look, Charles, I think
It's the same principle, that's what I'm saying.
Gentlemen,
do we just
are we asking?
you have made your point
Are
on
we
this.
asking?
For me, on the issue of government expecting any government response, I think the opposite is what you'd expect, because all these pastors, one thing is absolutely common: when they are never anti-government by any stretch. On the contrary, they have friends in high places, they have security around them, they are armed to the teeth, to say the least. So there's actually no separation between them and the state. They almost act like state agents because they support the state. Some of them overtly during elections, they support the NRM. At least they don't oppose the government, which is, I think, government so happy with it. For example, Kololo, for all intents and purposes, is a military installation. So how can anybody go and convene there without the blessing of the
Actually, you can. No. Kololo at the airstrip, you can actually.
No, I'm saying for all intents and purposes.
You can rent.
You can go and rent.
No, but the process, I have seen people trying to get access to Kololo. It's a very long process. You have to apply.
On
to the-
New Year's Day,
So
Charles.
for me,
but
I think that my only, if it's really a quarrel, is that these people, unfortunately, contrary to what any person can interpret to be the intention of the gospel, to cure both spiritual and material deprivation of most people. Most people go there for both. They are looking for material satisfaction, which they hope they can get through prayer. But there's also evidence that these pastors, if they took the trust people have in them and harnessed that trust, they could actually materially improve those people's well-being. But they don't attempt to do that. They don't.
No, but
The pastor is improving dramatically, but these people are walking back. They can't even afford a taxi fare. It's fine for them to trust him, but he should also be feeling for them.
But that's
And
how
I think that would be good.
Again,
CEOs in companies in this town and so many millions and the foot soldiers.
I'm
I'm sure about
less than $100.
That's true.
But
I don't know which CEO you are working with.
but Charles,
Yes.
I personally have no qualms with Elvis Mbonye or his followers, especially in a country which has a constitution that guarantees the freedom of worship. And
extortion
and
guarantees
that freedom
freedom of
is
extortion.
is quite ambiguous. You can't touch it, you can't feel it. It's it depends on the merits and the facts of each case. So I have no problem with that. Also because I know that human beings express affection and admiration and respect in various forms. There are people, including members of parliament in this country, who will do anything and everything to impress the president. We even see them wearing yellow gowns, yellow socks, yellow pants, yellow shoes, yellow car, to show admiration to the president.
Yellow ties.
If you compare that, yellow ties, if you compare that,
The president has got to pretend
listen, Ona,
to
listen.
offer heaven. He
During
offers
campaigns, for example, there were stories of women that traveled some as far as Mukono to come and give the last penny in their lives to contribute to Kizza Beshige's campaign. And I fail to understand why the rationale of that would be. So, I mean, the women in this town that have tattoos of either male actors or footballers that they love, I don't see how different that is from journalist Kableta licking the shoes of Mbonye. So I think it's normal. But my challenge is, Emmanuel Mutaiziwa, who is the producer of the show and the investigations editor at NTV, did an expose which attracted predictable criticism on the rot and utter criminality that persists in the born-again
So what a
community.
contradiction.
You have extortionists, people obtaining money by false pretense against the laws of this country. You have people infecting, some of these pastors, infecting innocent little girls with HIV/AIDS intentionally against the laws of this country. You have the most horrid, the most painful, gruesome harm being caused to little suspecting Ugandans by some of these people, and they have state protection.
Yes, but
It's also
true,
yeah.
Ivan.
Yeah.
That I've being a
Yes.
journalist, sometimes you end up in places you don't expect to end up. I've gone some churches, and some of them look like hospital wards. Very sick people, desperate, thinking the only place they can get help from is the church. Number two, heading into the 2006 elections, the born-again Christian movement in this country had an understanding or made a promise to President Yoweri Museveni then that they would deliver to him, I think at that time was 4 million voters
And they deliver.
going into that election. And they had a discussion. The negotiation was support us to be recognized as a faith in the constitution, because the constitution has a very limited recognition list of churches. I think it's the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Seventh-day Adventist, Islamic religion. Is there another one? I think there are about 6 that are recognized by the constitution. And they've been lobbying for many years to be recognized. The trade-off has been, one, that we give you the numbers because we have this captive audience. Anybody who can go down to lick the shoes of their pastor will do what their pastor tells them. And the politics has played along.
Exactly.
President Museveni has visited several times someone like Desteo Bisaka who
Obsobose.
who lives in Kagadi. He's gone to all these churches. New Year's Day New Year's Day
He's the busiest man in town.
New Year's Day last year, before elections, he visited 5 different church communities across the country.
And Charles, for me, just to come in there, that is where the problem is. Because now, that has created a very dangerous atmosphere that allows for criminality to percolate in the community. Essentially because these guys, as like Ona rightly said, the big, and you've explained, yeah, they don't threaten the politics, but also a big constituency for the politics. So that essentially means pastors, like the NTV documentary and other investigations by the media and other platforms have shown, can literally get away with anything, including land grabbing, including frustrating government projects,
smuggling,
including smuggling, including
including
rape, including defilement,
washed up,
yes, including
front property
yes,
many years ago,
including defilement and all sorts of other sordid things. Something happened at Machindi a few years ago. A brigadier, one of the finest men in this town when it comes to giving you humor, Kasire Gwanga, shot in the air because some born-again faithfuls were making noise for him. And a few days later, the president sent a lieutenant general, who is now retired, to go and speak to him and tell him, please make a public statement and say sorry, and say that, clarify that you did not mean to cause harm, because the First Lady was giving the president a lot of stress. And so Kasere Gwanga, of course, gives media interviews to say, you know, I didn't mean to do any harm. These guys were...
You should have said I was just telling God that I'm happy.
These guys were only making noise for me. These guys were only making noise for me. Now,
it was fireworks for God, eh?
Now, Kasiri Gwanga does all sorts of things in this town and rarely gets that level of attention. But the moment he shot in the air, when those born-agains were praying, it elicited attention of the First Lady and the President, essentially to show support for the born-again faithfuls. And I think the First Family, and indeed the entire political machinery that is in charge of the affairs of the state, has every justification to hunt for votes and support in whatever constituency they think will add value to them at the election period. They have that justification. My challenge is that has created an environment that has allowed crooks, that's allowed defilers, rapists, and people to do all sorts of crazy things, as happen in this town every single day. If you speak to a person like Pastor Solomon Mali, who might have his own issues and weaknesses, and the passion with which he speaks about the atrocities being committed against the people of this country by members of the born-again faithful community, it's painful to imagine that all these things can happen, and the state can only afford to look on.
Gentlemen, we need to bring the show to an end, and I'll use my discretion to bring this show to an end on a discussion about far removed from the city. We've had a discussion on this show that's focused on Teso sub-region. We've had a discussion, I think, a bit of mini discussion focused on Toro before and other areas. We're taking it back there as we end the show. Next Saturday, I think, King Oyo will be marking 22 years on the throne, and there have been a lot of activities going on in that part of the country, in that kingdom. Like happens.
Is he Illuminati?
I have
king. He's a king.
I have no idea. No, kings can't be Illuminati, can they?
Well, we hear, but there's a whole revival of the crazy mystery these days. I find with young people who they're struck, but they're historicizing the Tracy and saying, you know, I have some relationship.
No, there was a Tracy on the show. They tried to say it was a Bukungu.
I'm Tracy, you know, they. So, no, but it's really interesting, aren't they?
No, they're not.
Oh. You should read your history. You know, they are magical beings who rule things.
Our time is out. We need to get out of here, gentlemen. Only that people have been following the Kenyan election, which we'll come back to discuss, the Kenyan developments since the elections on 8th August, and they are being overturned by court. The chief executive officer, a very flamboyant gentleman called, what's his name? Chiloba. Yes, has given an in-depth interview, and this interview is done by Pamela Setone, who's the managing editor of the East African. So if someone has been following, and there was that controversial letter written by
allegedly.
Yes, allegedly. And both of them are in this paper, and of course, what Tanzania hasn't happened in Tanzania in a very long time, opening of fire on a member of parliament who disagrees with President Magufuli, Tindilusu, who's now, I think, in hospital in Nairobi.
So
there's a story about who might have wanted him
You can
dead.
understand why someone said Nyerere should not have left power.
But Charles, the bit about Tanzania.
Just lastly on that, I don't know what's happening in the region. There's still controversy over whether this Rwandan lady, Diane Rwigara, was arrested or has been hiding from the authorities. There's a whole interesting story. They said they picked her with her mother and her sister, questioned them, and police says released them to go back. And apparently they barricaded themselves in their compound. And then police went to get them out of the compound. So there is a whole lot of controversy over whether she's been under detention or not. For the benefit of our viewers, Diane Rwigara threatened to contest against President Paul Kagame. She wasn't able. Instead, pictures of her in the nude were leaked to the media, and finally she was stopped from getting
So
nominated.
putting all those things together,
Yes.
suddenly looks like Uganda is the most politically
Stable, rich.
stable.
Charles, I can't
Stable country, yeah.
wait to read the interview with Chilova.
Continue their job.
You know what the Tanzanians did when they were making that constitution was to simply say the outcome as declared by the Electoral Commission shall be final. So you cannot challenge a presidential election in Tanzania in the court. So what the EC says is final, and then you go home and wait for the next 5 years.
And the biggest crisis now
Which
in
I think
Kenya is how the
progressive.
IEBC, the Kenyan Electoral Commission, is going to deal with the next election, which they've set for October
Which
17th.
is the same people.
In 60 days.
The
Yes.
same people doing the same election, and you expect different results.
Of course, better
Gentlemen,
than Uganda, where if the Supreme Court annuls the presidential election, you only have 20 days
Yeah,
within
but
which to organize.
that-
The Kenyans have 60
Gentlemen,
days.
our time is out. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much, Onapito Ekomolot. Thank you very much, Angelo Izama. Thank you very much, Fabrice Rulinda. And thank you very much, Ivan Okuda.
And thank you, Charles,
Thank you,
for
Thank you very much to you all our viewers for joining us tonight and always, and especially those of you who contributed to this discussion and each one of you who watched. And thank you very much to our production crew that stays up late to deliver the show. For me, it's a good night.
Good evening.
See you next Sunday.